we're going to be talking about loss, and we're going to be talking about grief, and then we're going to talk specifically about how that relates to the holiday season. Again, my name is Sandy Atmore, and I'm a certified grief recovery specialist, which is a really fancy way of saying that I have been trained to facilitate grief recovery workshops and take people through a process to really complete loss and complete grief. And I was trained, all of us actually, were trained by the Grief Recovery Institute. Yes, that's the heat. The Grief Recovery Institute is located in Sherman Oaks, which is really cool that we have them here in California because this program has been around for over 30 years. There are two founders, John James and Russell Friedman, and they are both centered out of Sherman Oaks. And this program is actually world-renowned. They were called in after 9/11. They were called in after Hurricane Katrina. So they have a lot of prestige when it comes to the subject of grief and loss, which is great. I was trained by Russell, and he's amazing. But the reason that we're doing this particular workshop and talking about the holidays is because there really is truth to that we hear about. The holidays can be hard for people. We hear that a lot. But truthfully, statistically speaking, in the month of December, there's a 15% increase in people seeking treatment for emotional disorders. And that's just people seeking treatment. There's probably a lot of people that have a very hard time that don't actually seek treatment for it. So we do this workshop for that particular reason. Okay? But before we actually get to talking about the holidays specifically, we need to understand just a little bit about loss and about grief. So the first thing about loss that I want to talk about, because we hear the word loss and hear the word grief, and I think a lot of times when we hear loss, when we hear that word like somebody went through a loss, we think of either two words, which is death, they've lost somebody close to them, or divorce. Those are typically the two words that we think of when we think of loss. But the truth is that there's over 40 losses, like loss events that we can incur in our lifetime that create grief. And they range. We can have a change in career, we can move, we can lose a pet, we can have a change in our health, we can have a loss of health, we can have a family member that goes through a change in health. Different life spaces can bring about losses. I know for some people, when their kids grow up and leave home, all of a sudden there's a huge loss there, right? We can incur losses in childhood. Some of us that have gone through abuse in our homes, it's a loss of trust, it's a loss of safety, it can be even a loss of personal boundaries. That can happen when there's been physical or sexual abuse. Our boundaries have been taken. And so those are all loss events. Breakup of a romantic relationship, loss of a friendship, a friend moves away. Those are all loss events. And all of those events create what we call grief. And there's nothing abnormal about that. Grief is a very natural and normal response to a loss of any kind. Any of those that I've mentioned and then some. What's not natural and normal is what we learn about how to deal with loss. It's not the grief itself or the loss itself that is abnormal, but we don't learn how to process grief properly. We live in a society, a lot of us grew up in families where we're really given accolades more for being strong, putting on a happy face, than we are for going through an emotional experience. And so a lot of times what we learn is if we're going through an emotional experience, we need to do it by ourselves because people around us in our community are probably not going to support us going through that. And so that's really why we talk about this kind of stuff, is because what we learn about it isn't really true. And so that leads me to talk about grief. And like I just mentioned, grief is the normal and natural response to a loss of any kind. And really grief is about undelivered communication of an emotional nature. It's a long way of saying it is the things that we have needed to say but have not said because we haven't been taught how. And there are a host of feelings that are attached to those communications. And they can range. They can range from sadness, bitterness, anger, all the way to joy, happiness, embarrassment. There's a host of feelings that are attached to those communications. But until those communications are made, we will carry those feelings with us. Feelings are energetic in nature. So once we have an emotional response to a loss, we will carry it with us until it is properly communicated. By the way, crying in and of itself is not grieving. A lot of times people mistakenly feel something happened. I lost a loved one. I cried, therefore I grieved. But that's not true. That's why 10 years later, that person can see someone or see something that reminds them of that person and feel like they just lost them yesterday. It's because grieving happens in delivering communication. Now, there's nothing wrong with crying. Crying is natural, right? It's normal and it's good. But until the communication is actually made, the feeling stays. And so that's kind of something that we can learn that really isn't true. And there's one more thing that I want to talk about when it comes to grief and when it comes to loss. And that is something that most of us learned about grief that just simply is not true. Most of us have heard somewhere that time heals all wounds. We've either heard it or we just kind of know it somewhere inside that if we give it time, we're going to feel better. And it's really unfortunate because that's simply not true. It'd be kind of like, you know, if you just gashed your arm and there's this big gash and there's like blood pouring out, you know, your face is getting all pale because you're losing all your blood. But you don't look at your arm and go, I'm just going to give it time. It'll be better. No, right? You like run to the doctor and go, oh my gosh, fix my arm, you know, put the stitches in there, get it fixed up. You go in and get medical attention, right? Well, emotional wounds are very similar. Until you go through a process to heal them, they will be there and they will stay. But yet a lot of us learn that. A lot of us learn, just give it time. Okay? And so what I want to do with that, just give it time, is I actually want to give a little illustration about just give it time, which hopefully none of you came here for any great artwork or anything like that. You're not going to see that tonight. Jenna's leaving now. But I am going to show you this because I think sometimes pictures are better than words, okay? And so to illustrate this, we're going to do this with a little girl named Sally. She's a circle, a triangle, and some feet.
She's beautiful.
Isn't she gorgeous? Okay. Sally is 6 years old. And unfortunately, Sally's parents are going through a divorce. Sally's dad is abusive. Sally's mom is not, she's not an abusive person. However, Sally's mom is not very connective. She's not very present. She doesn't really meet Sally's emotional needs. Also, you know, Sally's very little. She's just going into school, and they've moved because of the divorce, and so she's getting picked on at school. She had a dog that died, and she has a bigger sister, like an older sister, who's kind of mean, kind of picks on her a lot. Okay, so all these represent those losses that Sally has gone through. Now, unless Sally has supportive people around her, okay, to walk her through the experience, this isn't your fault, how are you feeling about this, let's talk about this, unless she has that around her, these losses are they're gonna get stuffed. Those emotional responses are gonna get stuffed, okay? So now, Sally's much older now. This is our timeline. And so now this is like 25 years later, and Sally is an adult. Now let me ask you, where did these losses go? Right? They stayed with her. Yeah. They stayed with her. And given all the time that's passed, it'd probably be safe to say that she's had more loss events, right, over her life, right? She's probably incurred more loss events as time has gone on. Which means she's going to do what she learned to do, which is stuff them. So there's going to be even more. So if we look at this illustration about loss and time, you can see that idea that just simply over time, it's going to make things better, it's dangerous. It's really dangerous because the truth is, unless she learns different tools, all she's going to do is accumulate more losses. And so there's going to be even more that she's carrying, okay? So at this point, what we've learned that there's many, many different types of losses. We've learned about grief, and we've learned that grief is about undelivered communication of an emotional nature. It's about the things we've needed to say, haven't said because we haven't known how. And then we've learned that time, in and of itself, doesn't heal. Okay? And so now what we're going to do is now that we have that kind of base knowledge about grief and loss, we're going to learn about the holidays, and we're going to look at the specific to the holidays and get an understanding of why the holidays are so tough. And to do that, we are actually going to turn Sally into a tea kettle. We get to do really cool things in the Grief Recovery Workshop. Okay, I just want you all to know.
That was a perfectly normal transition.
I think so, actually. I think that turning Sally into a tea kettle is actually perfect.
But it had any other?
I know I wouldn't either. I really wouldn't either. So, we have now turned Sally into a tea kettle so that we can understand the holidays a little bit better, okay? Now, what we're going to do with this tea kettle is that to represent all the losses that Sally's carrying, we're going to put water in the tea kettle, and that represents all of her losses, right? Now, given all the losses that she's carrying, I'd say her tea kettle is probably pretty full. By the way, it's a magic tea kettle, and you can see through it. Okay, so it's the holidays, all right? The holiday season is upon us. And Sally has family coming into town. Wow, these are some of the same people that Sally grew up with. There's a flame. On top of that, Sally, there's some people that won't be there this holiday season. She's had some family members that she's lost, a grandmother that she really, really adored. There's another flame. Sally also got a text from her sister. Her sister's really mad at her because she's not able to go visit her sister this holiday season. On top of that, you know, it's becoming the end of the year. Sally's looking back at her life, and she's looking at some of the things over her life, and she's realizing, wow, it's the end of the year. I'm really not where I thought I would be. I'm not in the relationship I thought I'd be in. My finances are not where I thought they would be. Because, you know, being that end of the year kind of time, it's that time of reflection because there's no more months left, right? Like it gets to be December and you're like, oh yeah, that next year is, there's no other months in the year, that next year is right around the corner. You know, every time she turns on the TV, there's those beautiful, what is it, Kay Jeweler commercials with the perfect family and everything's perfect and the perfect life. There's another flame. I'm sure as I'm talking, you can think about your own flames, right? Your own triggers. These are triggers, okay? But this holiday picture is not quite complete. We have to add one more thing, okay? We need to put a cork in the tea kettle. And we're going to call this cork the shoulds. I should be happy. I should be joyful. I shouldn't be sad. I should be excited to see my family. I should. Okay? And if we look at this, now, if we look at this analogy, we can understand why there is a 15% increase in people that seek treatment for emotional disorders in the month of December. Right? Because really we've taken Sally, we put flames under her feet, we put a cork in her throat, right? It's like a recipe for disaster, you know? And actually if we look at this picture, the truth is Sally's life was already limited, right? She was already carrying a lot. But now that we see what happens during the holidays, it becomes that recipe for disaster. And that's a big reason why we see that 15% increase. And so now that we understand that, we are going to look at what do we typically do with all this stuff that's all heated up with a pork in it. What do we do with that? Where do we go? How do we cope? Right? We love that word. How do we cope? And so we're going to learn a great acronym. It's called STIRBS. And that is short for short-term energy relieving behaviors. These are things that we do when we don't want to feel. They're called short-term energy relieving behaviors. And I'm going to give you an example of what they look like, okay? So, remember I told you that Sally was bullied, that the kids picked on her? Okay, so Sally comes home from school, she's really upset. Kids have picked on her. She's crying, there's tears coming down her face. And she goes to her mom and she says, "Mom, the kids were picking on me today." And her mom says, "Here, Sally, have a cookie. You'll feel better." So what does she learn? She learns that food is a way to deal with her feelings. Right? Can you guys think of any other things that we might do to deal with our feelings?
Drugs,
Yes.
alcohol.
Yes. Very good. Any other ones?
Exercise,
Mm-hmm.
shop.
Retail therapy.
Watch TV.
Yes. Very good. Yes.
Is sleep one of them?
Absolutely. Very good. Yep.
Sexual relations?
Yes. Yes. Very, very good. Daydreaming is another one. You know, when the fantasy type stuff. Movies. Anger can be one.
Internet, Facebook.
Facebook, that's a good one.
Don't put Facebook out there. I'm not ready to confront that. Just kidding.
Facebook can help, you know?
Yes. Well, and
No, people throw stuff out. You know, like for example, my support group. You know, we have a Facebook page, and people will put stuff on there like, "I'm feeling like this and this and this,"
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
stuff, and then it's almost like people reply, "Yes, it's not direct communication," you know, but it still helps. But I guess that would be short term.
yes, well, you make a great point, because the truth is, not all these things are bad, right? Like, we need to eat. Working out is in and of itself is not bad. Yeah, exactly, right? They're not all bad. But it's the motivation, right, behind it. When we do these things to displace or distract our feelings, they can become dangerous. Work is another one, right? Workaholism or gambling. So we know we have to work, right? We know we have to work. We have to make an income. But what happens when somebody works to avoid their feelings, right? They can become that workaholic, and then they're not there for their family. They're not present. They can lose their family. Same with shopping, right? There's nothing wrong with going shopping. But when we do it, right? Yeah, it's an excess thing. And what happens, right? You could probably relate to those times where you go shopping and it feels really, really good, you know, when you're actually shopping and you're spending. And then you come home and it's like, wow, I just bought all this stuff. And it doesn't feel so good anymore. It's a short-term release. It's not a solution, but it's a short-term release.
What did it stand for again? I only have short-term energy release. What does the BS stand for?
Short-term energy relieving behaviors.
Relieving.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, you are welcome.
Wait, so the S isn't anything?
Yeah, it's behaviors. The S,
Got it.
STIRBs.
All right.
Sounds
So
better than stirred.
Yes, exactly. You say,
Stirb sounds like
these
a
are my
sexually transmitted disease.
these are my STIRBs,
I know.
okay? So, interestingly enough, this is typically the way that we learn how to deal with our feelings. Typically, this is what we learn. We learn this like how Sally learned from her mom, here, have a cookie, you'll feel better. We learn it from watching other people. We learn it from seeing the people around us, the culture around us. Isolation is another one. And again, I mean, stirs can be dangerous if this continues. Because remember, as time goes on, without learning the tools, Sally's just gonna accumulate more and more and more loss. And so it's gonna take more stirs, right, to keep relieving that behavior. Which is why a lot of times unresolved grief underlies most addictions. Okay. Now, seeing this, right, for the holidays, doesn't it make sense now why people overeat, oversleep, drink too much during the holidays, right? Makes a lot of sense why that happens. Because when you take this analogy where you've got triggers, you've really got no release at all, it makes sense that all of a sudden these even become even greater, right? We're going to sleep more, we're going to eat more, because we're going to cope with all of this that's going on here. So, now that we know this, now that we know what happens over time, we understand the holidays, we understand ways that we cope, we're all done. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't leave you there. That's it. Now that you have all this knowledge, we're done. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're going to give you solutions for the holidays. There's a process that we're going to give you, and we have it on a handout too, so it's all written out on a handout as well. But there's four basic steps. It's not really steps, but just 4 basic things to understanding the holidays and having a better experience through the holidays, okay? So the first one is awareness and acceptance. It's really great that you've been here tonight because you already have a lot more information about loss and grief than most people. And awareness is really a huge, huge key. It's realizing about loss. It's realizing about what happens over the holidays. Because really, if you want to go from point A to point B, I want to have a better experience, you need to know where your point A is, right, before you can go there. So the first step is just the knowledge that you have already about loss and grief is more than what most people have. But the second part of this is acceptance. And what acceptance does is it takes out the cork, right? It says, instead of saying, I have to feel joyful, I should feel this way, it says, I feel the way that I feel. I don't feel very happy right now. I feel sad. Just that shift right there is huge. Because when we take the pressure off of ourselves to feel a certain way, that's really half the battle right there. It's a release in and of itself when we can acknowledge, I'm not feeling so great. And I don't like the K Jeweler commercial because it doesn't, my life doesn't look like that. Exactly, right? And I use that as an example, but that's always the commercial that comes to my brain because it's just that picture of perfection. And you can look at that and go, but it's not, I don't feel that way right now, and that's okay. So that's the first one, right? It's that awareness of this is how things work, and wow, it's the end of the year, and of course I'm feeling a lot. And I accept that, okay? The second one has to do with your stirs. You just learned about stirs. Do you know that so many people stir most of the time and don't even realize it? A lot of times when I first share this information in classes, people are like, oh my gosh, I think I spend most of my day stirring. Yes, a lot of us do, because that's all we've learned, right? That's all we've learned about dealing with loss. So the second step has to do with our stirs, and it has to do with have a different relationship with your stirs. Okay, again, back to awareness. Now we are aware of what a stir even is, that we do it because we don't want to feel. Now let's have a different relationship with that behavior. Instead of this behavior, eating is a solution, let it be an indicator. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and say, now that you know about these stirs, you're never going to do them again. Because that won't happen. However, what you can do is you can say, okay, you know what, I really am wanting to eat this whole box of cookies right now. What is it that I don't want to feel? You can ask yourself the question. It's a very simple question. Either what am I feeling or what is it that I don't want to feel? Let the stir become an indicator for what you're trying to avoid and write it down. I highly suggest having a little journal with you that you can jot those things down in. Huge. Huge. And so now instead of the stir being a solution, it becomes a little warning light. Wow, I want to just sit down and I want to check out in front of this TV for hours. You know those times when, like on Netflix, you know, you can watch that show like all the whole season and, you know, you can really, you know, you can really check out for a while. When it's more than just, you know, I want to take a few minutes and enjoy myself, but no, I want to just zone out. Ask yourself the question. Ask yourself the question. Kathy talked about in her presentation about that, how our heads and our hearts get disconnected, right? We hear that all the time. Oh, well, what do you do about that? Ask, what am I feeling, or what is it that I don't want to feel? And just jot it down. You will be amazed at how much you actually know about yourself when you don't just let it stop at the behavior. Okay? The third thing has to do with the triggers. This is a really, really important one. Really important. Understand that the flames did not put the water in the tea kettle. The things on outside, the family coming to town, it being the end of the year, they didn't put the unresolved grief inside of Sally, right? All those triggers did was make her more aware of what losses she's unresolved with. Because here's a lot of times what happens when we get to holiday time. We go, well, if I can just avoid as much family as possible, if I can just sleep a lot, like I'll just, you know, sleep through the holidays, if I can just avoid everything, right? If I can avoid these triggers and just get through it, then I'll be okay. But what we miss is that we're already carrying this stuff. It's already here. Holiday time just kind of heats it all up and brings it up to the top. But this water in the tea kettle was here long before the flames came. Having that understanding helps you because it puts you in the driver's seat of your emotional well-being. It's not what's on the outside that's causing this. It's already inside. Now what do I do with it? It's a shift. You see what I'm saying? It's a big mind shift when we do that. Because we realize that. Now, please hear me. I'm not saying that that means that, you know, you should limit time with people that aren't safe. I'm not saying that at all. You know, if there are certain people that are just not safe and you don't have a good experience, I'm not saying that, well, now I guess I just have to spend all the time with them because it's not their fault I'm feeling this way. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm a big proponent of safety and of feeling safe. But have the understanding that that thing on the outside isn't making you feel something on the inside. Those things are already there.
What if the thing on the outside caused the water on the inside?
Originally.
Originally.
Great question.
Right.
For example, I remember I said that Sally's dad was abusive.
Right.
Okay, that was one of her losses.
Dad comes to dinner.
Dad comes to dinner. Now, does Sally want to put a boundary? Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. However, that loss is still inside Sally. And she's still got to do something in order to communicate it. And it doesn't have to involve the person, the original perpetrator.
Okay.
It doesn't have to. And I'm going to just digress for one quick moment just to illustrate this in my own life. I went through a lot of abuse as a child. I was abused physically, sexually, verbally from the time I was 2 until about the time I was 14 or 15. Years went by, years, 25 years. And when I first started, by the time I started to deal with my losses, I was smoking meth every single day. I lived out what STIRS do. So, here's the thing. The biggest and best day of my life is when I realized that I didn't need my mom or my dad, and my dad was my main abuser, that I didn't need my mom or my dad to do anything in order for me to deal with the pain that I was carrying inside. It was one of the best days of my life. because they weren't about to change. And what it did is it helped me to not sit there and wait for them to do something so that I could feel better. Because honestly, even if they had, I was still carrying this, even though it was their fault. It wasn't my fault. I was a child. It was not my fault at all. But that one shift, realizing that this didn't put this in here, and that I was carrying this, and I could do something about this, was like one of the best days of my life. It was probably the most empowered I ever felt in my whole life. So that one realization there puts us in the driver's seat, right? Yes, of course we're going to limit our time with unsafe people. Absolutely. But understand that just that in and of itself is not going to resolve what's already been put in there. Okay? And then that brings me to the last step, and that is talk to safe people. Have some safe people that you can actually verbally communicate to. Writing things down is good. Having your journal is great. But delivering the communication, meaning someone that you can call and say, you know what, this is going on and this is how I'm feeling. So-and-so's come into town and they're already driving me crazy. And, you know, this happened with my sister and it's already driving me crazy. Or this happened with, you know, my friend and it's really tough for me. Here's the thing about loss that most of us don't realize. Loss isn't about being fixed. So, with your safe people, this is a two-way thing. Because I get this question a lot. What do I do if somebody's gone through a loss? How do I help them? Listen. The biggest and best thing you can do is listen. And if you're feeling something, the best thing that you can have done for you is somebody to listen. So with your safe person, when you call them, hi, can you just do me a huge favor? Can you just listen to me? I don't need a solution. I just really need to express myself. Can you just hear me right now? Takes the pressure off of the person on the other end, by the way, because now they know they don't have to figure out a solution to your problem, because there really isn't one, right? And on the other side, if you are interacting with someone who has dealt with a loss or who is having a hard time around the holidays, the best thing you can say is, I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you. And just listen. It's such a great thing when we realize the heart really doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be heard. Mm-hmm. And that's on either side. So have your safe people that you can talk to. That's going to help you so much. Like I said, writing is good, but verbal communication is better. It's better because when you're heard and you get that community of being heard by somebody else, it's like there's healing that happens in that. It's really, really important. One other quick note to that is that as people, we were created for community. Okay? We were created for relationship. Not one of us was ever meant to go through an emotional process like grief alone. It's not possible to heal by yourself. If you isolate in a room, you will not heal. So safe people that you can talk to and speak to is absolutely key. Really, really important. And a lot of times it's our drive for community that drives us into isolation, because if we feel like, wow, if I share this thing and I'm not going to be heard, I might as well not share it. So if I'm feeling badly, I should just go be by myself. So seek out those safe people. Really important. Even if it's one person. It's huge. I cannot tell you how huge that is. So that's really the final component for the holidays. And it's an important one. Like I said, it's very, very, very important. And we have handouts, so I'll make sure that all of you get the handout and get the information, because just so everybody knows, there will be a class starting